Ever since the OLED Steam Deck was announced, I have seen a whole bunch of people wondering if they should upgrade their existing LCD Steam Deck to the OLED Steam Deck, and a lot of people wondering if the screen is worth the upgrade. But there is way more than the screen that got upgraded with the Steam Deck OLED. In fact, I don't think that there's a single feature of the Steam Deck that hasn't been changed in some way with this upgrade. And the OLED Steam Deck is objectively better than the LCD version in just about every single way. Now, I unboxed my Steam Deck here live on the YouTube channel in the most recent episode of the NerdNest podcast. It was about an hour and 45 minutes discussion of the new features that are in the OLED deck versus the ROG Ally versus the Legion Go versus the Nintendo Switch versus the Steam Deck LCD. I'll link that down below if you want to check it out after this video. During that stream, I was asked many times if I thought that upgrading the deck was a good move. And just like what I said a minute ago, I do think that the answer is different for everybody. But the answer for me in that first 2 hours with the Steam Deck was no. However, it's been a few days, and I think that for me, the answer is changing now that I've had more experience using this new version of the Steam Deck. If I didn't already have one sent to me by Valve, I would absolutely be selling my LCD deck and using the money that I would get from selling it and turning around and buying an OLED Steam Deck because it is that big of an upgrade. And I would say if you're thinking about it, then sooner would probably be better than later, because I think the secondary market is about to be flooded with used LCD Steam Decks, and the price is going to drop fast. Now, if you're somebody who's looking to sell your Steam Deck, that's probably bad news because the price is dropping fast. But if you're somebody who never had a Steam Deck and is looking to pick up one for the first time, and you don't want to spend a whole lot of money, maybe you're price sensitive, then I think that picking up one of the LCD decks would be a fantastic buy. But if you can afford it, then I would say get the OLED. You're not going to regret it. All right, OLED Steam Deck. Let's talk about the screen first. I've seen some people wondering why Valve decided to leave the OLED screen at 800p resolution instead of upgrading it to a higher resolution. And one thing that comes to mind is performance targets. Valve wants to hit the same exact performance targets with the OLED deck that they are hitting with the LCD deck. If they increase the resolution, then some games are not going to run nearly as well, and they won't be hitting those same performance targets, which makes it harder for devs to fine-tune their games for the Steam Deck. This is one thing that Valve is doing that none of the other handheld PC manufacturers are doing. They're trying to get devs to hand pick and tune their games to run well on the Steam Deck, and I think it's paying off for them. On top of that, a 7-inch screen, I don't really think that higher than 800p is needed. In my most recent video about the Legion Go, I said that I keep my games running at 800p on that screen, which is a good deal larger than the Steam Deck. And while it makes Windows look terrible on that display, the games look great. So even though the screen of the OLED deck is about half an inch bigger diagonally, I don't think any adjustment to the resolution was really needed. And even if Valve increased the screen size more than just a half an inch, I still think that keeping it at the same resolution is the right move. Your games are going to run better. They're going to look just fine. And at a screen size of that small, I don't think it makes any difference. Another change that they made to the screen is they increased the polling rate for the touchscreen. This is certainly not something that most people care about, but what it means is that when you touch the screen, they increased how frequently the screen is checking to see if it's being touched, which means that the touch screen feels more responsive than it did before. And that's one of the first things that I noticed when I was unboxing my Steam Deck is just typing on the screen felt better. I know it's not all that often that we bring up the on-screen keyboard to type something in, but on the LCD deck, it was always kind of slow and sluggish. And I'm here to tell you it feels way better, especially when you combine that with the haptics, which I'll talk about later. It's a small change, but it's definitely something you're going to notice. But the biggest change when it comes to the screen is obviously it is now an OLED display, and the colors just pop. It is gorgeous. I'm going to keep this brief without getting too technical, but the advantage that an OLED has over LCD is that there's no giant backlight lighting up the whole screen. In fact, each pixel, and I could be wrong about this, but I think each subpixel actually has its own backlight. And because each subpixel or just pixel has its own backlight, that means that if you don't need a pixel on, like if something's black, then they just leave that pixel off and it looks like it's off. It looks like a perfectly black pixel. And this is not something you can ever see on an LCD panel. And because a pixel that's black just looks like it's turned off, everything that is dark looks darker in all the right ways. Because we don't have that big giant backlight, the darker colors are way darker, and the colors are far more accurate when comparing them with the screen of the LCD deck to the OLED deck. The color difference is almost unbelievable. The screen on this thing looks like a high quality magazine printing. It looks fake, is what I'm saying. It doesn't look like it's a real computer screen. It looks like something that somebody printed. And I've never seen something like that before in a PC handheld. And the more time that I spend using it, the less I want to go back to my LCD, especially the washed out LCD colors on the original Steam Deck. In order to take advantage of the deeper blacks on the OLED screen, Valve updated SteamOS to be darker. Now, I hope that they didn't do this across the board. Like, I hope it's just on the OLED that it looks like this. And it's not because I want people to feel like they're missing out. It just doesn't look as good, or at least I don't think it'll look as good on LCD with those super deep blacks, because they won't look black, they'll look gray. Next up, let's talk about the refresh rate of the new Steam Deck. The old Steam Deck had a refresh rate of up to 60 hertz. Now, I really never put too much thought into this because I always thought to myself, you know, I'm not going to be running games over 60 hertz on this panel anyway, so 60 hertz is the upper limit that is perfectly reasonable and works great. However, when you take into account frame doubling or frame tripling, that actually tells a different story, and it's not something I really considered before having hands-on with the new system. The new OLED screen in the revised Steam Deck goes up to 90 hertz, and the number of games that you're going to be playing at 90 hertz are few and far between. But this gives you way more options when trying to match your frame rate to the refresh rate of your screen. Now, very quickly, without getting too technical, let me explain what I mean by frame rate and refresh rate. And if you already know the answer to this, stick around and make sure that I get it right. Frame rate of a video game is basically how often a game can generate a new frame and send it to your screen, while the refresh rate of your display panel is how often that panel can actually display the new frames that it gets. If your refresh rate and your frame rate are not evenly divisible by each other, then you'll run into issues that'll negatively impact your gameplay or simply make for an unpleasant gaming experience. So if you're playing a game that is stable around 30 frames per second, then you can set your frame limiter in the quick access menu to 30 frames per second, and the new UI will automatically set the Steam Deck to its refresh rate of 90 hertz, showing you the same frame 3 times before showing you the next frame. However, maybe you can push that game just a little bit more, and maybe you can hit 40 frames per second. Well, what's going to happen is you can then set your screen to 40 frames, and the Steam Deck will set the refresh rate of the screen to 80 hertz, showing you every frame twice. Now, maybe a game has been out for a while, and at first it would perform pretty good at around 40 frames per second, but we've got new shaders that have been cached on Valve servers and downloaded to your Steam Deck, and now you can probably maintain around 45 frames per second. Now you can increase the frame rate of your game up to 45 frames per second, and the deck will then use frame doubling and set your refresh rate to 90 hertz again, showing you the same frame twice. And if you're playing a game that can easily hit 60 frames per second or 70 frames per second or 80 or 90 frames per second, then the panel will simply set the refresh rate to match your frame rate, giving you super smooth gameplay without any frame doubling or frame tripling. It's a really elegant solution, and I love the way it's being implemented on the Steam Deck. All right, let's talk about HDR. I'm not going to say that this is the only handheld PC that has OLED and HDR because I just don't know, but it's the only one that I've ever seen. It looks really fantastic depending on the game that you're playing. I feel like HDR is very hit or miss, and it depends on what the developers have done. It also depends on you knowing how to set it up. Do you know when you start a game for the first time and sometimes it shows you like a logo in a white box and they're like, make the logo barely visible, and then they show you a logo in a black box and they're like, make the logo barely visible? That's you basically tuning your HDR settings or tuning your contrast settings, how far it is between the whitest whites and the darkest darks on your screen. Now, some games when I do that, I feel like I get it right, but most of the time I'm always a little worried that I'm not doing it the right way. And some games end up looking fantastic with HDR on, while others just look kind of weird. More often than not, I end up turning it off, but I'm glad it's there for games that get it right. For instance, Baldur's Gate looks absolutely crazy good on this display, but I ended up turning HDR off on Cyberpunk 2077 because it made all of the menus look washed out, and it made things look less dark, which I really, really wanted that dark look because of the OLED screen. I've never seen a display on a video game system look anywhere near as good as this does. And that being said, if all you have is the LCD Steam Deck and you're not looking at next to the OLED deck, you're going to be fine. It's still a good system. The existence of the OLED Steam Deck does not make the LCD Steam Deck automatically a bad system. And that's something that I feel like too many people fail to understand. Let's talk about the virtual keyboard and the haptics on this thing. Like I said earlier, the increased polling rate makes typing on this feel much more responsive. In fact, the haptics on the Steam Deck keyboard are ridiculously good. I don't know if they're as good as the haptics that you feel on an iPhone or an Android phone because you just don't use them nearly as much. But each tap on the keyboard has a very satisfying haptic feedback that lets you know, yeah, you got that button pressed. Good job, buddy. Trackpad haptics are also better. For those of you that were at our live stream on the day that our Steam Decks got delivered, I said that the trackpad haptics felt a little more subtle, and I wasn't sure how I felt about it. I had forgotten that I had completely disassembled my Steam Deck and put it back together, and I'm not sure, but I feel like my haptics have never quite been the same since then. So I don't know if I can really answer how they feel comparatively, but the haptics on the new trackpads feel really subtle. They feel really good, and I am a fan. And I think that they are currently a win. So I don't know if I can make a really good comparison to the LCD trackpads, but the trackpads on the OLED deck, they're great. They're responsive, the haptics feel good and subtle, and honestly, I have no notes on them. They're just fantastic. Great job, Valve. I'm one of those people you should never ask my opinion when it comes to audio. My hearing is bad, and I don't care about lossless or anything like that. I'm usually just happy with how things sound. Bluetooth doesn't bother me. Everything's okay. When the Steam Deck LCD came out, I was impressed at how loud it got. It sounded fine to me. I had no complaints. When Asus released the ROG Ally, people were saying how much better the audio was than the Steam Deck. And I have to be honest, I really couldn't hear all that much of a difference. I mean, it got louder, but did it sound better? I don't know. And then when Lenovo released the Legion Go, a lot of people said that the speakers sounded really bad. And I personally attribute to them being top firing speakers, which I'm not a fan of them being top firing speakers. I understand why they did it. It's because of the detachable controllers. So that was really not something that they had a choice in. But do they sound bad? Again, I don't know. I would really love to hear what you all think. Pun intended. I would love to hear what you guys think. But for me, I'm satisfied with the audio on all of those devices. Valve also updated the sticks on the Steam Deck, and they are a massive improvement. They're not Hall effect sticks. Valve says that Hall effect sticks, they have quality control concerns with Hall effect sticks that they don't have, but with potentiometer sticks. I have Hall effect sticks in my LCD Steam Deck, and I've never run into problems with them, but I've only had that for a little while now. I'm sure that Valve wouldn't say that there was issues with Hall effect sticks if there weren't issues with Hall effect sticks, so we'll see what happens after a year or two. The old sticks were flat on top, and these new ones in the OLED deck are concave on top, which is way more comfortable. I wouldn't say that the old sticks are bad in any way, but the new sticks are much better. Valve also ditched the gray color in favor of black. I guess they're reserving the colors for just the limited edition one. By the way, I'm real curious, how many of you are going to be picking up the limited edition Steam Deck OLED? Let me know in the comment section down below that like button. I'm curious how many of you are doing that. Moving on to the Steam buttons. The new Steam button and quick access menu buttons are a huge improvement over the prototype version that I have. Now, I don't have a retail version of the LCD Steam Deck. I only have the prototype version, and I have heard people say that they had improved those over time. But oh my God, the OLED deck buttons are so much better than the LCD buttons, at least on my old Steam Deck. The old ones feel mushy and you never really know if a click has registered. The new ones are clicky and satisfying, and they're still flush with the shell of the deck. So if I were designing this myself, I would raise them up a bit, or at least give them a different texture that felt a lot better, or maybe like a dot in the middle of it so that when you're reaching for it with your thumb, you could easily hit it without looking down. But when you go to click it, you absolutely know that you clicked it. Now, this last change is the one that I think surprised people the most. They now have a much larger battery in the Steam Deck. This is because the LCD panel was much thicker than the OLED panel, so they're able to squeeze more battery into the Steam Deck, going from a 40 watt hour battery up to a 50 watt hour battery. Now, you might think that that is an increase of only 25%, but it's actually way better than that. You're going to get improvements of 30 to 50% battery savings over the LCD deck, according to Valve. So why is that? Well, it's for a few reasons. Number one, the OLED screen doesn't have a backlight that's on all the time, so the black pixels aren't lit up at all. So you're going to save power there. On top of that, they did a die shrink from 7 nanometers down to 6 nanometers. Now, this will still have the same performance profile, but it'll be way more efficient. Plus, they put in lower latency RAM that went from 5500 megahertz on the LCD up to 64 megahertz on the OLED deck. And this lower latency RAM allows the CPU to go to idle faster, which again means that you're spending less time waiting for that CPU to clock down, saving battery in the process. The Steam Deck OLED now has the most efficient APU of all the major handheld PCs, although I would argue that it already did, and now it's even better. And on top of that, the 50 watt hour battery in the OLED Steam Deck is bigger than the one that is in the ROG Ally, which is the same battery size that's in the LCD Steam Deck. And it's bigger than the battery that is in the Lenovo Legion Go, which clocks in at 2.2 pounds. That thing is huge and massive and heavy. It's still awesome. But how they crammed a bigger battery into the Steam Deck while lowering its overall weight by, I think, 30 grams is just crazy to me. All right, upgrades. I've seen a lot of people wondering if you would be able to pick up parts for the OLED Steam Deck and put them into your LCD Steam Deck. Valve has said that this is not possible. And the reason it's not possible is because the internals have been changed around a lot. And the different parts are different thicknesses and different shapes and different sizes. And so you just can't shoehorn them into them. I'm sure that there's going to be some very, very technical people that are going to find some way to do it. Like you look at that crazy video that Linus Tech Tips did where he put a giant heat sink on the back of his Steam Deck. Sure, you're going to be able to do crazy stuff like that. But just buying the parts off the shelf and dropping them in isn't going to be an issue because of all of the changes that they made inside the Steam Deck. Now, the question that this video is meant to answer, should I upgrade my Steam Deck? I think if you look at each individual change, the answer is no, you shouldn't. However, when you take all of those changes and put them together, the increased battery life thanks to the die shrink and the faster memory and the bigger battery, the OLED and the ability for you to have better pull times on your keyboard, the better joysticks and the increased refresh rate, allowing you to double and triple your frames, I think all of that together, at least for me, the answer is yes. I do think that it's worth it to upgrade your Steam Deck from the LCD version to the OLED version. That being said, it doesn't mean that the LCD version is bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's still a fantastic device. If you don't have a Steam Deck yet and you're thinking about, I want to save money on this, you could probably get one really cheap right now and you'll have a fantastic time with it. But if you can afford it, I think you should absolutely go for the higher tier Steam Deck without a doubt. Anyway, that's what I think about it, but let me know what you all think in the comment section down below that like button. Are you going to upgrade your Steam Deck, or are you going to be picking one up for the first time? And if so, which one? Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, you're probably going to enjoy this video right here from the Nerd Nest. I'm Bill. Stay rad, everybody.